Today is February 13th, 2025, and the world seems remarkably different from just a day ago. Although the situation is still unfolding, it's evident that something significant and possibly historic has occurred. We're working to understand its consequences and potential impacts. The major news from the past day revolves around a lengthy phone conversation lasting about 90 minutes between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin. This discussion appears to have altered the narrative of the conflict in Ukraine. Both nations' reports of the call highlighted shared views on several key issues, which is unusual given the history of opposing statements from Moscow and Washington. Interestingly, President Trump did not use the term ceasefire in its traditional sense. Instead, the focus was on stopping the violence and achieving a lasting, comprehensive peace agreement that addresses the root causes of the conflict. The term root causes is crucial. For years, the Russians have maintained that any peace deal must halt the eastward expansion of hostile alliances in Ukraine and neighboring countries and include formal security assurances. Until now, most Western leaders have ignored these demands. This call might signal a shift in dynamics. Right after speaking with President Putin, President Trump contacted President Volodymyr Zelensky of Ukraine. This is where the news became particularly dramatic. The tone was more about informing President Zelensky of what was discussed with Vladimir Putin rather than seeking his input on negotiations. The U.S. might be indicating to Kyiv, this is the direction things are heading. Here's what to expect. Simultaneously, U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth delivered a speech in Brussels that surprised many European officials. He stated that the U.S. no longer sees NATO membership as a future possibility for Ukraine, that no American troops will be deployed on Ukrainian soil, and that the aid previously provided may have reached its limit. Suddenly, one of the main objectives some European governments had, full NATO membership for Ukraine, was dismissed in Washington. This isn't just talk. Defense Secretary Hegseth highlighted the enormous sums already spent in Ukraine, hundreds of billions of dollars, and stated that such spending is unsustainable. He also indicated that America would shift its focus from Europe to other global issues. In simple terms, he told U.S. allies, if you want to continue this conflict, you'll have to manage it yourselves. We have bigger concerns elsewhere. Reactions from major European capitals have been swift and concerned. In interviews, several EU and UK officials expressed frustration at being blindsided by the Trump-Putin conversation. Others said they were caught off guard by the sudden change. Some, like a former British defense minister, argued that Washington has betrayed Ukraine and rewarded Russia before negotiations have even begun. The notion of betrayal stems from the fear that the United States would reverse its stance without securing all the concessions Ukraine and Europe once sought. However, analysts note that for the past 2.5 years, Russian negotiators have been firm about what they consider non-negotiable. With the battlefield also shifting in Russia's favor, many argue it follows that Moscow won't agree to any arrangement that doesn't address its security needs. Given Russia's current leverage, Washington is merely acknowledging reality, according to some. Despite the uproar, Secretary Hegseth made one crucial point. The U.S. believes it has done all it can, providing unprecedented foreign aid and military support. Now, Washington prioritizes stopping the killing above all else. Europe may cry betrayal or not, but the U.S. has changed its stance, and it has done so rapidly. According to the Kremlin and President Trump's team, the call wasn't limited to Ukraine. They reportedly discussed energy, Middle East stability, and Iran's nuclear program, among other topics. Remarkably, the American and Russian accounts of the call were almost identical. Both leaders expressed interest in further discussions and even visiting each other's capitals. President Trump mentioned having been to Moscow, and at one point, President Putin was invited to Washington. However, before either of them visits the other's country, they might first meet face-to-face in a third country location, reportedly Saudi Arabia. The Saudi government is reportedly preparing for a potential summit, a move that would further marginalize Europe. Major U.S.-Russia summits have traditionally been held in European cities like Geneva, Helsinki, or Vienna. Holding important meetings in Riyadh or elsewhere in the Gulf underscores how much priorities are shifting in Washington and Moscow. Public comments from President Zelensky have indicated both disappointment and shock. Until now, Kyiv and a few European powers believed they had a stronger commitment from Washington to support them militarily for as long as it takes. The previous White House had made these promises repeatedly. But where the old administration responded, as long as it takes, the new administration replies with stopping the killing and accepting realities on the ground. If Ukraine's government pushes back against or outright rejects new negotiations, the U.S. might simply walk away, observers say. This leaves Kyiv in a difficult position. On one hand, agreeing to a settlement that barely restores former borders could be politically damaging. On the other hand, continued resistance could mean losing American support entirely and facing Russia alone. However, some within Ukraine's defense and foreign ministries argue that NATO membership remains possible. But that contradicts Secretary Heth's statement. Many worry that persisting as if the original plan is still achievable could prolong the conflict or even trigger a worse humanitarian crisis. Barely noticed is the appointment of Tulsi Gabbard as the new director of national intelligence. She is a high-profile and controversial figure and has sometimes criticized the Democratic establishment and taken independent stances on foreign policy issues. Some view her appointment as part of an effort to shake up the intelligence community. Others see it as a sign that the Trump administration is open to more expansive approaches to dealing with Russia, the Middle East, and global security challenges. Meanwhile, Keith Kellogg, who had been considered for the role of special envoy for Ukraine, has been conspicuously absent from the new negotiations team President Trump named. Instead, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, Vice President J.D. Vance, CIA Director John Radcliffe, and Envoy Steve Witkoff, among others, will lead the upcoming talks. This personnel change indicates the administration is seeking a new perspective, moving on from strategies that have not achieved progress with Moscow. Many European leaders are now being forced to confront an uncomfortable reality. The American defense umbrella is no longer guaranteed at its previous levels, and U.S. priorities are not assured in terms of supporting any conflict on the continent. Some European diplomats worry that with America stepping back, Europe could be left to deal with the aftermath in Ukraine and face a more assertive Russia. Others suggest this could be a wake-up call to develop a genuinely strong European defense capability. But the bigger question is whether European militaries have the resources to contain Russia without American leadership. Financial constraints, domestic political divisions, and fear of direct conflict have limited Europe's independence. Diplomatically, the greatest challenge will be to bridge the gap between Europe's desire to remain relevant in any talks and Russia's clear preference to negotiate directly with Washington. As the Munich Security Conference approaches in just a few days, the world's hopes will now rest on the shoulders of Vice President J.D. Vance and Secretary Rubio as they meet directly with President Zelensky. The message, it seems, is straightforward. If you can't come to the table and work with us towards some negotiated peace, we can't continue funding this war effort. But observers are still questioning how far Russia will go to capitalize on its advantage on the battlefield if negotiations fail. All of this leads to one undeniable, if uncomfortable, truth. The ground has shifted. Yesterday's news changed everything, and none of us can predict how this will end. Thank you for joining today's analysis. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more content on global issues. Stay informed, stay engaged, and we'll see you next time.